Welcome back to the Crash Course Podcast. My name is Craig Crash Collins, joined as always by Brandon Scott, otherwise known as B. Scott. You know what? We've been talking about football for the last few months, and now we get to step away from that a little bit. Not that we necessarily want to, but we've got some other things to get to. It's finally time to talk some auto racing. It's time to get into the college hoops side of things as we get closer to the NCAA tournament. Really excited about that. Coming up here in about a month or so, and then of course, we've also got some Pacers talk that we want to get to tonight as well. So we get to step in, talk about some other things going on. Really excited to do that, B. Scott. But first and foremost, how was your weekend, man? It was good. I mean, turned the big 3-0, so that's always fun. We're getting into another. Yep, we're getting into another decade. I've now been alive in 4 different decades, so that's fun. Really excited to get into that. So it was a very fun weekend, and it was also made even more special by the fact that the Daytona 500 was on my birthday this year. So that was Right, exactly. Yeah, I was going to bring it up a little bit later, but why does it always seem like every year there's a gigantic red flag in the Daytona 500 that it ends up being at minimum it starts at 2:30 and ends up ending at midnight, I feel like, or if it doesn't, go 2 or 3 days, it feels like. Right.
Time just a big rainstorm popped up and just completely drenched the track. Now thankfully Daytona does have lights and they don't care how long they have to wait for Daytona. Now I mean obviously if it kept raining and raining they would have pushed it to today, but just because they got a delay doesn't mean they're gonna, it's getting dark out, let's push it to tomorrow. So
right.
I'm glad they did that though. But yeah, it's because of the rain, and it just so happened they got lucky in the fact that there was that huge wreck on lap 15 that caused them to throw the red flag, and then when they threw the red flag, it started raining. So it was just kind of welcome to Daytona. It's just what we do here.
Yeah, it just feels like every single year. Because I was trying to remember. I can't remember the last time that, at least it doesn't come to mind very quickly as far as the last Daytona 500 to end in the daylight.
At least this one did not go to Tuesday or Wednesday like it did several years back when Juan Pablo Montoya caused it to get delayed another night because he decided to go drifting in the rain and run into the back of a jet dryer, which caused it to blow up.
Yeah, I remember that. That was wild. So let's go ahead and get into the recap here of the Daytona 500. Like you mentioned, B. Scott, there was a big crash on lap 15, and of course, it involves our picks to win the Daytona 500. If you saw our prediction video that we put out, we put out that I thought Ryan Newman was going to win, and you thought Alex Bowman.
Alex Bowman.
Yeah, and they both get caught up in that crash. So, B. Scott, it looks like I'm bringing the crash kiss of death to you. I'm used to it, but now
it's the way it's been recently, ever since the NFL playoffs.
Yeah,
you're rubbing off on bad on me.
You used to be the voice of reason, and now I'm just dragging you down with me.
But you got to realize though, with Daytona, it is such a crapshoot. Mm-hmm. Daytona and Talladega are the 2 tracks where you can make a pick, and there's about a 99.9% chance you've got it wrong, because it is about having a good car. It is about driving the car correctly and everything. You have to be good at it, but man, it is a lot of luck in these restrictor plate races, and that's exactly what we saw. I mean, look, on the final lap, almost the final turn of the final lap, the leaders took each other out.
Right.
So, I mean, anything can happen at any moment at that track, and all of a sudden, all of the favorites. I mean, really, if you look at it, the 2 big wrecks, usually you can always count on at least one big one. You call it the big one. Mm-hmm. And it's usually about middle of the pack, where it happens because those guys just start driving too dicey. Because you always want to be up at the front or down in the back, away in the back. So that way you can either avoid it by having the big wreck behind you or be way behind the big wreck. So that way you can get off the throttle and avoid it at all costs. But this year, the big wreck was caused at the front of the pack each time.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
That's pretty rare. I mean, it is not uncommon to see a big wreck happen in the end up near the front because that's where everybody's going to start racing balls to the wall for the lead. But the one on lap 15, that was ridiculous. Are you kidding me? You're 15 laps into the season and you're racing like that already? Calm down.
Right.
They did. But you just don't see that. I mean, that one you expect in the middle of the pack or out in the near the rear of the field when people are really trying to make those risky moves early on to get themselves into a better position or get themselves into a position where they can be with their drafting partner or whatever it may be. You just don't see that happen up at the front like that.
Right. Absolutely agreed. So that's the crash that ends up bringing out the initial red flag. As you mentioned, there's then a 5-hour and 40-minute red flag for rain. It was kind of a tale of two races because Denny Hamlin led 98 laps. I mean, not, at different times, but he wins stages 1 and 2. He was looking pretty dominant, in that new, with that new team, teaming up with Michael Jordan. So, that team.
No. That's separate.
Is it? Okay.
That is. He still strictly drives for Joe Gibbs.
I got you.
He is a co-owner with 2311 with Michael Jordan. So that's, just because, him and Bubba worked together a lot in the race because of that connection and both being Toyotas. You saw all the Toyotas work together. You saw all the Fords work together and all the Chevys work together. But they are not on the same team. They may share technology from Joe Gibbs because of the Toyota factor.
Yeah.
But they are not on the same team.
I gotcha. So Denny Hamlin wins both stages 1 and 2, leads 98 laps. There were 22 lead changes among 13 different drivers, 7 cautions for 40 laps. But as you mentioned, big crash on the last lap. It was, when they hit the white flag, it was Joey Logano leading with Brad Keselowski second. Michael McDowell was third. And then going into turn 3, it didn't really look like Logano. I mean, it kind of looked like he came down to block, but it also didn't look like it was that crazy of a move to try to prevent Keselowski from getting by, but they do end up colliding and taking each other out. Michael McDowell takes the lead. For a brief period of time, Chase Elliott then kind of moves back in front of him, but because at the time of the caution, McDowell was the leader. He takes home his first career win, which is pretty wild. I mean, to get your first career win, I can't remember who it was.
You said it's like the 4th time that's happened.
Right. I was trying to remember. Was the last
Trevor
time?
Bayne was the last one.
That's what I was going to say. That's the guy I was trying to think of because he was in the Wood Brothers.
It was his second career race.
Right. Because that was for like the Wood Brothers, wasn't it? The 21?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It was like the classic paint scheme out on it as well. So it was like really historic for the Wood Brothers to get back to victory lane at Daytona and whatnot. So.
Yeah, so, a big win by him, first career win, which is wild. But yeah, as far as the race is concerned, I thought it was a fun race. The new car, it seems like kind of what NASCAR needs in the sense of, the new car kind of balances things out, but you still saw, the faces that you're familiar with. You still saw your Kevin Harvick's, Denny Hamlin's, Brad Keselowski's, Joey Logano is still at the front, but it looked like there's some new people kind of jostling for position as well, which is what you like to see, especially coming off of a year where NASCAR did kind of take the spotlight a little bit. You kind of want to see some of those new faces at the front. So I think it's really good to see Michael McDowell get the win. Again, it kind of stinks that there's that big long delay, but I think it stinks that the race ends at midnight on a Sunday. So you obviously.
Hey, at least today was technically a national holiday.
True. That does make it a little bit better as far as people being able to see it. But I think it was a fun race. Pretty standard for as far as Daytona 500s are concerned. Stinks that you had the big red flag, but not much you can do about that. And then of course. Good to see Michael McDowell. Great story. I said it in our prediction show. I wanted to see the story, and hey, when you get your first career win at the Daytona 500, that's a pretty big story.
Yeah, it is. I honestly, I don't think the new car had anything to do with the new names that we're seeing up at the front. Because technically, it was the same old names, just sprinkling a few like Michael McDowell, Ryan Preece, Austin Cindric. Well, Austin Cindric's a rookie. That was technically his first start, up at this series. And he had just won in the Xfinity series, so he has the experience. And I mean, Austin Cindric comes from a racing family. I mean, when your dad is basically the chief strategist for Penske, Tim Cindric, I mean, he comes from a racing background. But I think one of the biggest reasons we saw a lot of different names up there was because this was a really big off season for NASCAR. There was a lot of shuffling of drivers. I mean, obviously we saw Kyle Larson get back into the racing world, back into NASCAR with Hendrick Motorsports, and he was up there all night, all day, whatever you want to call it. But I think it's just because there was a lot of movement of drivers. And I think also early on, you saw a lot of the bigger names, a lot of the favorites get knocked out on the lap 15 wreck. And if they weren't completely knocked out, they just weren't fully repaired enough to contend for the win. So that really shook things up as well. But yes, this next gen car, it's kind of an even playing field a little bit because everybody is still trying to figure it out and kind of feel it out. But the biggest factor is they had like less than an hour, I believe it was, of total practice time leading up to this race. I mean, yes, they had the Busch clashes, and they had qualifying, but qualifying doesn't really help you with anything because you're out there as a single car. But they did not have a whole lot of practice time. Speed weeks were taken up with a lot of other things, and they're still working their way back through their COVID protocols as well. So I think it really leveled the playing field because of that. But I mean, obviously, you still saw a lot of the same olds up there. Hendrick Motorsports, Joe Gibbs Racing, Penske, Roush Fenway. I mean, Stuart Haas. So it's not surprising to see those names, but at the same time, I mean, obviously the Bubba Wallace being up there, that was really good to see with that being a new team. We didn't really get to see what Daniel Suarez had because of the wreck. Obviously, he got unlucky and got caught up in that. But, yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be an exciting year. I think really we're going to see this new car really kind of stretch its legs on the road course, especially next week. I'm so excited. I'm so glad that they decided to follow the Daytona 500 up with the Daytona road course. That's going to be awesome because even if you watched I forget what the race was called, but it changes sponsorship every year. But that kind of exhibition all-star race thing that they do at the kickoff the season on the road, they did it on the road course this year, and that was a very exciting.
Oh, like
race.
the Bud Shootout?
Yes.
Is that what you're thinking of? Yeah.
Yeah, the shootout. That was a very exciting race. So that just kind of shows you what to expect this next weekend when you have a full field, you have a longer race. It's going to be really exciting. And they did a lot of testing with this car on road courses, mostly because if you look at this season, there's going to be a lot of road courses. It's not just your typical Watkins Glen and Sonoma or the old Sears Point. It's not just those anymore. I mean, it's totally shaking things up this year. I mean, Daytona road course on there. Let's see. I think they're still going to do the Charlotte road course, the Roval.
Yeah.
I love the Roval. I mean, obviously they're adding the Indy road course. I think that's phenomenal. I've always said it. I think that's going to make for a much more exciting Brickyard. Circuit of the Americas. Wow. That's going to be so cool. That is such a cool track. And then Road America. I mean, come on. To see these guys at Road America is going to be awesome. So there's a lot of really good road courses for these drivers and this car to really spread its legs on. And I think you're going to see a lot more competitive racing at those types of courses as well. I think this car overall is just going to be it's just been a really good thing for the future of NASCAR.
Oh, yeah, I agree. It's going to be a fun season, and we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of a preview. I know it's typical we usually do our previews like before the season actually starts, but I mean, it's one race. Daytona 500 is kind of
They kind of do it backwards, though, in NASCAR, because if you really think about it, the Daytona 500 is the Super Bowl of NASCAR. They kick off the season with that. And really, 9 times out of 10, it doesn't really factor too much into who the overall champion is, because so many of the championship favorites get knocked out throughout the race. And then you have a guy like Michael McDowell win the race. I mean, Michael McDowell now has an entry into the playoffs because of winning the Daytona 500. But he's going to be one of those guys that's going to be there on the back end of it because of the standings. Unfortunately, I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, unfortunately, that's the way it is.
Right. But could you imagine if they
he's in the show? That's all that really matters, and ultimately for him in the end. But yeah, I don't really take too much into account. Like, oh, got to look out for this driver because they performed well at the Daytona 500. It's like, well, let's see how they perform.
Hey, all you got to do is get in the dance.
The championship contenders really start to come out.
All you got to do is get in the dance, man. He's got that ticket in there.
That's tough. When you have that low of a money flow coming in for your team and you're going up against the big boys.
Right.
I know you like the underdog story. I like it too, but
yeah,
that's a tough one. I mean, he's got to win more than just the Daytona 500 to actually be in true contention and be consistently in the top 10.
Well, we are going to get into our season preview of the NASCAR season, but first, let's get a word from our friends of the show. The Crash Course Podcast is brought to you by Anchor. Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to start? Look no further than Anchor.fm. Anchor allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or mobile device, and will distribute it to other sites such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. On a budget, not only is Anchor completely free of charge, but will allow you to make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. Anchor, it's everything you need in a podcast in one place.
Are you tired of your same old lunch hour of sitting and scrolling through your apps on your smartphone? Have you thought about playing a board game with your coworkers? Eat Lunch and Board Game is a podcast dedicated to telling you about board games that are great for lunchtime fun and some that are probably better saved for after work hours. I've been playing games at my office for over 4 years now, where I have made new friends and business connections that have been very useful. Board games build bridges.
All right, so as you were mentioning, B. Scott, there's a lot of interesting changes on the season for the NASCAR world. We do have a lot more road courses on the schedule. You touched on that, of course. Yeah, I'm right there with you as far as the Daytona road course. Really excited to see that, and the Indianapolis road course. There's 7 total on the schedule this season, so you got those 4 new ones, and you've got, of course, the normal ones like, Watkins Glen and Sonoma. I'm really excited for the spring Bristol race that's going to be on dirt this year.
That's like in a few weeks.
Yeah, I know.
Very awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be a very fun race to watch. Nashville is on the schedule this year for the first time. You've seen some IndyCar races and the kind of lower series like the the truck series and stuff have been on Nashville, but not NASCAR. So that'll be not the Monster Energy series. So that'll be really cool. And then of course you've got the All-Star race in Texas. So a lot of different changes. Of course you got the new car as well. So it's going to be really fun to watch. Of course we mentioned Denny Hamlin's team with Michael Jordan. Bubba Wallace is the driver there. Daniel Suarez teams up with Pitbull. So you've got a lot of you've got a lot of interesting things on the schedule for this year, and I'm really excited to see. You mentioned it, the Daytona and IndyCar and Indy road courses. I think those are going to be some 2 really great races. The season's going to be really fun to watch, and I think this is really good because, like I said, last year they kind of NASCAR kind of, in my opinion, took a step forward as far as they had the limelight. Whether or not it was a good or bad thing, for the rest of the sports world. I mean, and obviously much bigger things were going on. Obviously, every other sport couldn't really do anything because of COVID, but NASCAR and IndyCar could, could obviously go on, and so because of that, NASCAR had the spotlight, and I think they've done a good job to take advantage of that. Basically being forced into the limelight a little bit, and these changes on the schedule. I mean, heck, I'm excited for next week at Daytona's road course. I'm excited for the Bristol dirt track race. There's a lot of things that they're doing this season that I think are steps in the right direction. I'm really excited to see what they do.
Yeah, me too. I think this is going to be a really exciting year for NASCAR. Like I said, because of the new car, which a lot of people don't know about, the addition of some really prominent road courses, some changing up of races like the Brickyard, instead of being on the oval, it's now the road course, which I think is going to be, I'm just so excited for that. Also, it being a doubleheader weekend with IndyCar as well, that's just going to put a huge spotlight on the racing capital of the world yet again. I love the dirt track idea. I'm really interested to see how that works out. I really am. I have a feeling that it's going to be a race where there's going to be a lot of wrecking.
Well, it's Bristol anyway, so
it is. So I'm gonna make an early pick on it. I am gonna say Kyle Larson runs away with that race, mostly because Kyle Larson had an entire year this past season where he was not in NASCAR, and he spent that driving dirt tracks in USAC and absolutely dominated. I mean, he would go to races and run away with it. It was unbelievable how good he was on dirt. So, early favorite, Kyle Larson at Bristol on the dirt.
Yeah, I'm interested to see, maybe this is a dumb thought, but I'm interested to see how that race is going to work also because, typically you see, dirt track, these cars aren't really built the same as you see on dirt tracks. So it's interesting to see if we're going to see kind of just a normal race just on dirt, or if it's going to actually how the dirt is going to play a factor on these cars that don't typically run on dirt.
Right. It is going to be interesting. I think different tires, obviously, and I wonder if they're going to change the suspension, because when those cars get into the grass, they just dig it up. That front splitter is going to be, it's going to have to be lifted high. I don't know. I think it's going to be a challenge for these teams, and it's going to be a fun, exciting challenge to watch, because also pit road is not on dirt. Pit road is still concrete, asphalt, whatever it is, but it is not dirt. So that will be interesting as well, because you can't really scuff your tires too much because you want to keep them. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I'm excited.
Yeah,
you don't have to wait too long either. It's just a few weeks.
Just a few weeks away.
What is the date? Do you know the exact date?
I don't know. I don't have the exact date pulled up, but yeah, it's going to be really fun. So yeah, those are that's what I'm kind of looking forward to the most is the Daytona and Indy road courses and
March 28th.
March 28th.
I'm going to be out of the country.
Oh, well, there you go. But it's
miss it.
6 weeks away though, so not too far away at all. So it'll be a really fun weekend there. I'm sure that's going to be really fun to watch, and I think that's really good for the sport. As far as our predictions go, we're going to make our pick for who we think is going to be our champion and who is going to be the dark horse to kind of have a good season and potentially, I don't know if you really, dark horse to win it, I guess, but I don't know if, it'll be interesting. It's kind of a driver to look out for. For me, as far as my champion, I didn't realize this, and you can tell me if I looked up, if I found the wrong data here, but I was very shocked to read it, and I didn't quite believe it, but I found it a couple different places. I didn't realize Denny Hamlin's never won a title.
Mm-mm.
I thought he had at some point.
No, he's come close, but
right?
He's never been able to actually get through.
Well, the closest he's come is second in 2010. So that was freaking almost.
Really. It is surprising last year just because him and Kevin Harvick were so dominant last year.
Right.
It was either one or the other, winning almost every race for a period there.
Right.
So if they would have the old way of point scoring, or naming a champion without the playoffs, Denny Hamlin or Kevin Harvick would have been your champion, not Chase Elliott, for sure.
Yeah, I've always kind of hated the point standing system just because I think in the beginning, or not the playoff system. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Because
well, I can't say that because I was really happy Chase Elliott won.
I'm starting to warm up to it.
You have one bad race, and all of your success that you've had throughout the entire season does not matter. But that's the way it is in any other sport too. You have one bad game, and all of a sudden, all the success you've had for the entire season is out the window. I mean, look, the Colts back in 2005 were the best team in the NFL. They had a rough fourth quarter against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they were out. And the Steelers went on to win the Super Bowl, obviously. But I guess that's the way it is with every other sport. Same thing, college basketball. You could be the best team in college basketball all season long. You get to the NCAA tournament, and you get bounced in the second round.
Yeah, I think
that's the way it is.
I think I like it because of the fact, or I'm starting to warm up to it because of now the eliminations. Because back in the day, it was just like they cut it off at 10, and it was normal playoffs, like normal point standings after that. So it wasn't really a playoff. It was just more or less like, all right, well, these are your 10 drivers that matters, and and the rest of the there's now just 10 cars that matter, and there's 33 cars that are traffic. Have fun.
It is interesting because it really shakes things up if somebody that's not in the playoffs gets up there and wins a race, and it's like, oh, are you kidding me? That could have been my spot in the next round, and you just took it from me.
Right. So my pick to win is Denny Hamlin, just because I tried to not let the first race influence anything, because it really didn't here, but I was like, man, when I saw that Denny Hamlin had never won, I was like, it's about darn time that he wins one. So that's my pick for who's going to win. Now, sorry, Denny, that means you're going to have a terrible year, so you might as well just phone it in now. And then as far as my dark horse, I'm going to go with Bubba Wallace. I think working with having obviously they're not going to share all the secrets from Joe Gibbs, but having that kind of, foot in the door of a, good established team like Joe Gibbs with Denny Hamlin, those two drivers working together, because as tough as it may seem, and as kind of shocking as it's been, throughout really the entirety of my fandom in NASCAR, Richard Petty's teams have never been really that good, and drivers really haven't had a whole lot of success there. So now that Bubba Wallace is away from that, not to say that it was anything like toxic or anything, but just saying getting away from that, getting to a new team, but with better intel, I think that's going to be really good and really good to see him. I think that'll allow him to kind of break out a little bit. So my champion is Denny Hamlin. My dark horse is Bubba Wallace.
My champion is Kevin Harvick. He came so close last year and just had a horrible day at Martinsville. And I feel like he's going to come back with a vengeance. And we saw how good he was last year. So there's no reason to believe he can't be that good again. And I feel like he's got something to prove. Now, obviously, it was a little he finished well in the 500, but like I said, I don't really take too much into account with that one. My dark horse, I'm going to go with my original pick for the Daytona 500. I'm going to go with Alex Bowman. He's a guy that just seems to be coming around and getting better and better every race. And obviously, it wasn't his fault he got wrecked at the Daytona 500. I think he would have been right up there contending for the win had he not. But I think he's somebody to look out for this season. I think he's a dark horse. If not him, I think the ultimate dark horse would be Kyle Larson.
Yeah, as far as looking forward to anything, forward to the most in 2021, we've kind of already touched on that, but is there anything else that you're excited for? We got the road courses, we've got the dirt track. I'm
just excited for a semi-normal season.
Yeah.
See the fans being back in the stands, just getting back to the storylines that are on the track, not the separate extra storylines on the side, COVID or any political movements, anything like that. Let's just get back to what it is, get back to racing.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for that. Just kind of have a sense of normalcy coming back. It seemed more normal because they allowed so many fans in at the 500 this year. It felt normal. Obviously, a lot of the fans left because of the rain delay,
right?
But still, there was a lot of fans in the stands. They had practice. They had the full national anthem and flyovers. It felt like a normal race weekend.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you there because I've kind of noticed, through 2020, and obviously there's a lot more that happened in 2020 than, that's more important than sports. But like, I just felt really detached from sports in 2020.
It just felt fake.
Yeah. So like, I was, looking at it, I was like, you know what? Like, I'm looking forward to having like a normal sports year, as normal as it can be, but just more normal than last year was, I tweeted out too. I was like, you know what? Tom Brady won the Super Bowl, so I guess we're back on the right track a little bit because that's about as normal as we get usually in football. But yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm ready for a more normal sports year in general, so I'm right there with you. Before we get into our college basketball talk and kind of shift gears here, I want to remind you that you can follow us on Twitter at Crash Course FM. You can like us on Facebook, Crash Course Podcast. Remember, we have our new YouTube exclusive podcast, the MCT Podcast. First episode is already out, so go check out them as they talk about pro days and they for the NFL Combine and talk a little bit of NFL draft stuff as well as some basketball. If we don't give you your full basketball fix, you can head on over there, Crash Course Podcast on YouTube. And then remember, you can listen on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course Podcast. And if you're listening on any of those, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, you can also head on over to twitch.tv/3C Media, where we record the podcast live every Monday. So let's go ahead and talk some college hoops. We haven't really talked about it much since the season started. Of course, the college basketball landscape, we talk about getting back to normal, but it's been anything but normal with, Kentucky and Duke both struggling and all that kind of thing. Although I don't know that there's really anyone too super upset about that except for those fan bases.
I think this was the first time I can't remember how long, I can't remember the actual number, but this year, Duke, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Kansas were all unranked.
That's wild. I was like, I knew.
It may have been like one of those things that's like the first time that's ever happened.
Yeah, I was like, because I thought Kansas was struggling too. So that's, yeah, it's been a wild year. I mean, whenever you have like Alabama as a projected 2 seed, it's been kind of a weird year for college basketball. But let's go ahead.
They got the bag man going. they got the bag man going to their recruits. I guarantee it. You're gonna hear. I guarantee it. I'm so sorry, but Alabama, really?
Yeah, right.
The bag man has been very busy down there, going to talk to some guys with a duffel with that good money, couple K's sitting in a duffel bag. Changing hands down there in Alabama.
Yeah, it's wild to see them up at the top. Hopping into the first Indiana team, we're going to go kind of across the state here. We'll start off with the Butler Bulldogs. They're 7-11, 8th in the Big East. They've lost 4 of their last 6 games. We kind of thought there was a chance that they could be, it was kind of a, they had a lot of turnover from last year, so it was, we were trying to decide, whether or not they could bounce back and have a good year or if it was going to be a struggle. It has turned out to be a struggle. The remaining schedule is Marquette. They're at Xavier. They get Seton Hall at home. Then they host number 5 Villanova, and then they finish their season at number 19 Creighton, who they did beat earlier on in the season. The key players on the year have been Jair Bolden, who's averaged 12 points per game, and Bryce Nyes, who's been good on the boards with 8 rebounds. But you kind of look at this season as it gets closer to the end here for Butler, is they're likely, not going to go to the NCAA tournament unless they can find.
They're not.
Well, right. I mean, they could win the Big East, B. Scott. They could still do.
As long as they don't get shut down again by COVID.
Right. So you kind of look at what's gone wrong, and I was, taking a look at the stats here. They are last in the Big East in points per game, rebounds, and field goal percentage. So they're not only, missing their first shot at the basket, they're only getting 1 shot at the basket. They're, not getting many second chance opportunities. So they're, not getting a lot of second chances on possessions, and they've also struggled away from Hinkle. There's 7 of their 11 losses have been on the road this season. So it's just been a rough go of it where they've struggled to really put a lot of points on the board, and then when they've struggled to put points on the board, they're only getting like 1 shot. So if they're having a bad shooting night, which they've had more often than not, it's pretty much sunk the entire team. So it's been just a rough year for Butler.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't really get a full off season of practice. Not a lot of teams did, but them less so. They've been shut down a couple times with COVID within their program. They're very young. They are a very young team. Their big transfer, I forget his name, but he wasn't ruled eligible until like halfway through the season. And so, you got to get that chemistry there with him. And, they're trying to find who their next big shooters are because some of those guys graduated. They're in a transition right now. I know a lot of people. I know people are starting to say, "Is it time for a change? Is it time for LaVall Jordan to go?" I don't know. For one, it is. I think it's tough. I think for Butler, it is very, very tough being in the Big East. Let's just be honest. It is a totally different animal than being in the Horizon League or being in. What was the conference they were in for one season before heading to the Big East?
Shoot. I'll look it up because I was like, that's actually bothering me too.
Xavier was in it for a while too, but
they didn't go to the A10 for a year, did they?
Yes, they did. It was the A10.
Oh, okay.
They were in the A10 for one season. So the Big East has always been a different kind of animal. They always have a different level of athlete. It seems like, obviously, because a lot of them are East Coast. It is a different style of basketball than what Butler is used to playing or Butler is used to recruiting. It's a different types of players. I mean, Butler's used to going out and finding the diamond in the rough in some backcountry school in Indiana. That kid that's been playing outside of his barn on a broken down hoop that can just drain threes from anywhere in the cornfield, and that's the type of player Butler has always gone after. But that's not the type of player that's truly successful in the Big East. He's not the athletic player. He can't defend very well, but he can shoot lights out. You always need one of those guys. But Butler used to make teams of that almost, and that doesn't work too well in the Big East. So I still think they're trying to find their legs. Just as they're getting their legs underneath them, COVID happens. They lose players to graduation. It's just a perfect storm for this team. I don't think it's time for a change at the coaching position. Now, if it continues on for the next few years and recruiting doesn't have an uptick anytime soon, recruiting is getting better, then I think it may be time. But don't jump the gun too soon on that, or else you may end up struggling even more. But it is tough for Butler because anytime any of their coaches have success, they jump to Ohio State.
Yeah.
Bad motto. Jump to Ohio State.
Yeah.
I mean, how many of them? Brad Stevens jumped to the NBA, but that's different. Chris Holtman jumped to Ohio State.
Yeah, it's rough when you're kind of in that, because it's wild because the Big East is kind of in the middle. It's now composed of teams for the most part that are still, in my opinion, sort of looked at as those stepping stone schools and not looked at as big powers, because obviously at the top
outside of Villanova.
Well, right, that's what I was gonna say. Like, you have those teams, and I would imagine UConn will eventually get back there too, where like if you go to UConn or Villanova, which I know this is UConn's first year back in the Big East, like you're gonna stay there because that's a pretty good school, pretty good basketball school, or at least has the history of being a good basketball school. Whereas you go to Butler, you're looked at like a mid major. You go to Seton Hall, you're looked at as a mid major. You go to Creighton, yeah. So it's kind of that like weird mix. So yeah, it's it's been rough for Butler, I think, for the most part since making that move. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see, and I think that's why, as far as like how they can salvage their season and have a little bit of a bright spot, is to knock off Villanova, who in the past they've been able to kind of have their number, and it is going to be a home game against number 5 Villanova or against Creighton. If they can sweep Creighton on the year and kind of say, hey, you know what? Creighton's a really good team. They're at the top of the Big East for a reason. We were able to sweep them. That could be something they can kind of hang their hat on, for the year and kind of say, you know what, it was a rough year, but we can kind of come back to this next season. When we're looking for motivation, we can say, hey, you know what, even though we finished the season, well under 500, we still got those big wins over, sweeping Creighton or beating Villanova or both. They can kind of go back and hang their hat on for that and use that as motivation and to get themselves in better shape for next year.
Yeah, I mean it's going to take time. It's just really strange for us to go from a team that was dominating year in and year out to what is going on now. But it's a difference. I mean, obviously, I don't know. It's a tough one to put your finger on to actually figure out exactly what's going on. But give it time. I have faith that the Butler ship will get righted.
Yeah, I'm with you. So looking now at Notre Dame, going to another team that we're kind of weird to see struggle. And it's been for Notre Dame, it's been kind of a weird last couple years because they've, you don't usually see Mike Brey teams struggle for this long, but they have been. They're 8-10. They're 11th in the ACC. They have won 5 of their last 7 games. The remaining schedule is Miami, Clemson, at Syracuse, at Louisville, at Boston College. Then they have their last 2 games at home against NC State and number 17, Florida State. Their key players, Nate Laszewski is averaging 15 points, 8 rebounds per game, and he's been really good from three-point range, 53%. Prentice Hub has also been good, 15.6 assists per game. So Notre Dame has been playing actually really good basketball as of late. So the question is, can they get back to 500 possibly before the end of the year? Of course, they've got 6 games. They could end up, I think down the stretch that would mean, they'd have to get, I think, 4 or 5 wins to get to that point. So unlikely that they will end up finishing over 500 or even get back to 500. But I think there are some, kind of like with Butler, they have some bright spots that could potentially help them, for next season. And if they can finish the season strong, it's going to be good for them for next year. But they do have kind of a tough schedule down the stretch.
Yeah. I don't know I think honestly, I feel like Mike Brey is done. He's not able to get this type of player that he has been in the past. I don't know. Notre Dame is another tough one. Like, how do you go from being like a 1 or 2 seed in the NCAA tournament not that long ago, making a run to the Elite Eight consistently, to being a doormat almost of the ACC? Now, I mean, they are a little bit better this year, a little bit, but it's just so. I mean, they beat Duke, but I guess everybody's beating Duke this year.
Right.
It is confusing, but I don't think I honestly don't think Mike Brey can right the ship. I don't think he can. I think he's been around there so long, and his success has been so up and down. I think if you're going to look at a place that needs to move on and make a change, it's Notre Dame. I think they need to make a change, and I think I don't know. I don't feel like he's all into it anymore. But I think making a head coaching change could potentially help Notre Dame in the future.
Yeah, I was looking back, through their last few seasons. So they made it. The last time they went to the NCAA tournament was back in their 2016-17 season. They got to the second round that year. In 17-18. They made it to the NIT second round. They were 21-15. Then they were 14-19 in 28, or they were 14-19 in 2018 and 2019. Then they were 20-12 last year, but of course there was no NCAA tournament. And then of course they're now 9-10 this season. So I mean, it is a weird thing too, because if you're Mike Brey, you could also be like, what, you're giving me, you'd be getting rid of me after a weird COVID season, and then where we were 8 games above 500, even though we didn't have a chance to go to the NCAA tournament, even if there had been one. Or you're gonna give me flack for a year that like Duke, and everybody was also down. It was kind of a weird basketball season, in general. So it is kind of weird to make judgments on that. But you're right. I mean, he's been there for 21 years, and I didn't realize it had been like 3 seasons since he'd been. I thought they had like made it 2 years ago, and then they had the 2 weird years the last 2 years. But it's been 3 or 4 years, basically a whole graduating class since the last time they went to the NCAA tournament.
Right, and I don't see them making a move after this season, just because this season I think is a wash for a lot of people. But if they have another season next year like they've had the past few, I can see them moving on.
Now, a bright spot for the Irish, I think, is the class of 2022. Laszewski is a junior. He's second in the ACC. Notre Dame is second in the ACC in points scored and 3 points percentage because of him. He's a big part of that. And their top 4 scorers are all juniors. And if they can hit on a recruit or two, I mean, I don't see why they couldn't have a bounce back year next year. But that may be also leading into kind of what you've mentioned too, where, hey, maybe not this year, but next year may be the move. If they have another off year next year, then yeah, that's not going to be good at all. But if these juniors that are having good years this year in a season where at the end of the year they're starting to pick things up, maybe they can have a few big wins down the stretch, make some noise in the ACC tournament, and call it a day. But having that talent that we see them have in that junior class. They could come back next year, hit on a couple of recruits, and have a decent season, and the story for Mike Bray changes.
Yeah, I mean, for them, what's tough is they've struggled recently recruiting the state of Indiana, and if you want to have success, you need to be able to recruit your own backyard. And what's tough for them is that even the players that are up in the region near South Bend are not going to Notre Dame. They're not. I mean, look, Jaden Ivey, his mom's the head coach of the Notre Dame women's basketball team, went to Purdue. I mean, there's Jalen Washington, maybe a name to watch out for in the future for them. Kind of a recruit that a lot of people are scratching their heads because he's recovering from an ankle injury. So he may be one of those that could slip to Notre Dame. But it seems like Notre Dame recently, and I know this is going to sound bad because of who I'm a fan of, but Notre Dame has been trying to pick up the scraps of Purdue, essentially. It's, okay, Purdue got their higher level recruit, so they stopped recruiting this guy. So now he's free to go to Notre Dame if he wants. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And that's been what's been a real struggle for them. And if they do land somebody, it's like, well, what is wrong with that player? Why did Matt Painter all of a sudden go off of him? That's been one of those, that's been a lot of the talk is, why did Matt Painter decide this player to stop recruiting this player? He's highly regarded, but what is wrong with this guy? What is he seeing that other people aren't seeing? And then those types of things ultimately end up panning out to be, guys that are busts or something. And that's just been what Notre Dame has struggled with. They've been struggling with recruiting just their own area, their own backyard, which is full of talent. It's a very rich, talented area. But they've just struggled to keep those guys home close to them to other programs whether it be Michigan State or Purdue. Those are the two that come into that area and just poach them away.
Very true. You brought up some Big Ten teams with Michigan State and Purdue, so we're going to get to Purdue here in a second, but we're also going to talk about the IU Hoosiers, the team you're a big fan of, B. Scott. The Hoosiers are 11-9 on the season. They're 8th in the Big Ten. They're projected right now as a 10 seed in the NCAA tournament, according to ESPN bracketology. They are 5-5 since the start of 2021 and haven't won more than 2 games in a row this season. The remaining schedule is Minnesota, Michigan State, at number 25 Rutgers, Michigan, and number 24 Purdue.
They just want to play Iowa every game.
Yeah, so
can we just get? They want to. They need to petition the Big Ten and say, hey, can we just cancel the rest of our schedule and just put games against Iowa?
Hey,
that's the only team that we can truly beat.
Yeah, and I mean, talk about a gauntlet to end your season. 3 ranked teams, although 2 of those games are at home. They have had some great, efforts this year from Trace Jackson Davis, who averages 19 points, 9 rebounds per game, and Armon Franklin, who averages 13 points per game. As far as I think what they'll do the rest of the season, I do think they'll finish above 500. They'll finish 13-12. I think they beat Minnesota. I think they beat Michigan State. Which gives them their 2 more wins, but I do think they, do lose. I mean, you're probably going to see it, flip one of those. I mean, I'm sure they're going to lose to Michigan and Purdue most likely because they can't beat Purdue, and Michigan's having a fantastic year. So, I mean, maybe flip Rutgers and Michigan State as a game they'll win and lose just because that's how
Michigan State, because everybody's beating Michigan State.
Yeah. So let's say they beat Michigan, or lose to Michigan State and then beat Rutgers. We'll just kind of flip flop because I mean, basically the rest of the year they're going to go 2-3, and they're going to finish above 500. But IU's had a solid season. I do think what they're going to do is they're going to end up 13-12, and I do think they're going to end up with the 12 seed in the tournament, just because usually 13 through 16 is reserved for those mid-major schools. You don't often see a major conference school be ranked lower than 12th. Or seeded lower than 12th in the tournament. So I think they'll end up with the 12 seed. A solid year. I mean, not necessarily up to IU standards, but considering, the circumstances. Well,
IU okay.
They're lofty standards. I didn't say that they realistically should have those standards.
Standards need to realize that IU is no longer a blue blood. IU is no longer a national championship contender year in and year out. They need to realize who they are, get their expectations lowered, and then guess what? The program can actually grow. When you have a program that's trying to live up to expectations of its fan base that are totally unrealistic and of where they are nowhere close to. I mean, I know I'm a Purdue fan, but even IU pundits say, like, listen to Dan Dockich. He says it all the time. It's like, guys, this is not the IU of 1987. This is not the IU of the early 90s even. This is not a blue blood program. This is a middling of the pack Big Ten program, even potentially basement of the Big Ten, that needs to get its footing together and needs to stop trying to live up to these unrealistic expectations. Another banner is not coming anytime soon. Bob Knight of his prime is not walking back through that door to coach this team anytime soon. And while we're at it, let's get off the talk of Brad Stevens is going to leave the Boston Celtics to lead Indiana back to glory. That's not happening either. I mean, seriously, you got what you got. You went out and you tried to get yourself a coach that you thought was going to be able to take you to the next level in Lil Archie, and he has no idea how to get his players into the best situations possible. I mean, it's sad down there. It's a sad state of affairs right now, I think, for the Indiana Hoosiers.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's tough because, I mean, you have those, expectations. It's kind of like what we talk about with, like, Michigan football, and even, I kind of mentioned about Notre Dame football and you got on me about it, but just the fact that they can't get out of their own way because of the history. I mean, Michigan football and IU basketball are probably an apt comparison.
Yeah, they're more applicable. I mean, at least Notre Dame is up in the conversation every year.
Right.
Are they at the tier of Alabama? No, but they're up in the conversation.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, it's just tough because you have those expectations, but it's just not been – I mean, it's been –
No. Like I said, the fan base has those expectations. National media, local, maybe some local media, Jeff Rabdons, but they don't have those same expectations that IU fans do. Every year they come in and they go to that midnight madness where the players play against each other and they all look really good because, well, when you play bad against bad, you look good, and they get blinders on.
Yeah, and
then they get into the gauntlet of the Big Ten. I mean, yeah, I'm going to look really good as a basketball team against the Indiana Deaf and Hard of Hearing schools, or Michigan Industrial Technology, I'm going to look real good against them. But when it comes to playing, I mean, yeah, they've beaten Iowa. I'll give them that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, like, going up against the big boys, This isn't a Tom Crean team anymore. Christian Watford's not walking through that door. Victor Oladipo's not coming through. Cody Zeller's not coming through. Those were good teams. Those were legitimate teams.
I wonder if IU like regrets getting rid of Tom Crean.
I guarantee they do.
Yeah.
I guarantee they regret, because he's having success now down in Georgia. I mean, he has to build it back up. He's got to build that success, but it's pointing. He's got the arrow pointed in the right direction down there.
Well, and I mean, look at
Tom. I mean, as much as you want to hate on Tom Crean was a coach that could get the most out of his players, and he knew how to develop his players. He also knew how to put his utilize his players to their fullest capabilities. Archie has no idea. I mean, it is such a discombobulated offensive mess when you watch them play. There's zero development, it seems like. I mean, Trace Davis Jackson is a good player, but he hasn't taken that next step that you would expect a player to take from a freshman year. I mean, he's taken a step from a freshman year to a sophomore year just from experience alone, but he hasn't taken that step to be that potential NBA lottery pick that a lot of people projected him to be. And then you got 5-star point guard Christian Lander down there, who was convinced, who he and Archie came together and said, yeah, let's go ahead and forego your senior year of high school because you're eligible to graduate early academically. So let's get you into IU and we'll get you going. That has been a train wreck, an absolute train wreck. Probably derailed the poor kid's career at this point, the way it's been going on, what's been going on down there with him. And it's starting to now work against them. I mean, for a while there, Archie was coming off of from Dayton that looked really good. He had a lot of good players there. He got him, get deep into the tournament. He was nice and shiny. Well, now it's starting to, that shine is rubbed off, and you're now starting to see that as far as recruiting goes. I mean, when Purdue is able to go down into Sellersburg, Indiana, and IU, down in the middle of the heart of IU country, and grab a player that is probably going to be he was the reigning Gatorade Player of the Year and probably going to be Mr. Basketball from that area, that things are wrong. I mean, obviously this kid wasn't a huge IU fan to begin with, but nonetheless, for that to happen, the arrow is not pointed in the right direction for IU basketball.
Well, hey, just it's crazy to think about it, about them being able to do that. And yeah, it's just been wild. Moving on now to the Purdue Boilermakers. Our last team we're going to kind of talk about here. They are 13-8, sixth in the Big Ten. They are projected as a 6th seed in the NCAA tournament. They have won 6 of their last 9 games. The remaining schedule is Michigan State, at Nebraska, at Penn State. Then they have home games against number 21 Wisconsin and Indiana. Trevion Williams has been a big factor this season for them. 16 points, 10 rebounds per game. Sasha Stefanovic, 10 points, 40 and a 43% three-point shooting for him as well. So looking at their remaining schedule, they've got 5 games left on the schedule, and I really want to say they're going to win all 5, but I'm just a little bit, I'm a little bit, gun shy on that. So I think they'll go 4-1 down the stretch. I think they'll finish at 17-9. And so, I'm really excited to see what they can do, because I think they can have a really good end of the season. I think they can have a really good Big Ten tournament, as well. They are, the only problem is, the teams in front of them in the Big Ten are really, really good. And they're just, they've been solid this year and they've been good, but I don't know, if they can contest with some of that talent at the top. I mean, there's 2, Big Ten teams projected to be number 1 overall seeds in the tournament. So, that just shows you how strong the Big Ten has been this season. So, you look at kind of realistic expectations for the postseason. I think their ceiling is the Sweet 16. I think they can make some noise in the Big Ten tournament, and they could wind up with a 5 seed. And then I think from that point, they could potentially, make it to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Obviously, it's kind of tough to project that because you don't know who they're going against. If they get 2 really, easy games, theoretically, in the first, couple of weekend or the first couple of games, then yeah, that would bode well for them. But obviously, if they get put up, against some really tough matchups, that could go the opposite way. But I think, I think they can make some hay in the Big Ten tournament, and I think that they can have a pretty good showing once they get to the NCAA tournament as well.
Yeah, this Purdue team's a tough one to figure out, but at the same time, it's because they are young. mean, look, 4 freshmen are essentially starting. No, 3 freshmen are starting. 4 of their 5 freshmen have been named Big Ten Freshman of the Week. And I think a couple of them multiple times. Jaden Ivey, I know, multiple times. So when you look at that, the future is very bright for Purdue. What a lot of Purdue people will tell you is that this team is ahead of schedule. You know, they expected another year of struggle, like potentially missing out on the NCAA tournament because of how young they were. I didn't think they were going to miss the NCAA tournament, but I didn't think also that we would see the success. I thought, I think Purdue is probably right where I projected them to be when I looked at this season, or right around the 6. I knew they were going to be higher than what the media put them at originally. The media put them at like 8 or 9. I think ultimately they still end up being higher. They just haven't played a game in a while. So with all the games that have been moving around the teams winning and losing around them, that's bumped them back down to 6. But I mean, they've been as high as 4th, and I think 5 is about as high as they go. 4th potentially in the Big Ten would be nice because that would get them, I think it gets them the double bye in the Big Ten tournament. So that would be nice. But this team is. I love how the freshmen are stepping up and playing. Obviously, you would like to see some more consistency out of players like Brandon Newman and Jaden Ivey, but at the same time, they're freshmen. I mean, yeah, Brandon Newman's a redshirt freshman, but still, nonetheless, they're both freshmen. And the fact that they're playing at such a high level already is a good sign for the future. Yeah, I agree. The ceiling is definitely the Sweet 16. I honestly believe this is a second weekend team in the NCAA tournament. Mostly because they're going to go. I think they play with a chip on their shoulder. Not really. I guess that no, I can't say that. They don't play. They don't play scared. They act like they know they belong, and they're proving it. Now, I mean, obviously they're not going to win the Big Ten, surprise anybody. I think looking at the remaining schedule, you get a win against Michigan State. Hopefully you get a win against Nebraska. Who knows if Nebraska will play. But I think you get a win against Nebraska. I think you get going to Penn State's always tough. That one is a toss-up. I think you get a win against Wisconsin and you get a win against Indiana. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll say they go at best 4-1, and at worst 3-2. To be honest, now they have been struggling here as of late. They've been very inconsistent recently, so I think that will get better because Sasha Stefanovic was out for a while with COVID, and he's still getting his legs back underneath him from that. So, I think this team is going to push being a 20-win team. And I think that could be a good goal for them, to be honest. But I see them, at least making it to Saturday of the Big Ten tournament and then making it to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament, setting them up very nicely for their future.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's the future.
The future for this team is a Final Four, to be honest, especially with what they have coming in. Next year they have the top 2 players in the state of Indiana, Caleb First and Trey Kaufman-Ray, the guy I was mentioning from Sellersburg. So those are 2 big names. And then the following year, another player from Homestead, Fletcher Lawyer, who's just been absolutely lighting it up. And a point guard from Philadelphia who hasn't gotten to play too much yet this year because of COVID. But the future is very, very bright for this team.
Yeah, real quick before we transition over to the Pacers, I remembered I started to go with a point at the end of when we were talking about IU, and then I forgot it, so I just went on to Purdue. It tells you all you need to know about Archie Miller. I mean, again, just not living up to the expectations when Dayton shortly after he's gone is like, weren't they like number like 1 or like up, like going for a 1 seed in the tournament? Last year.
Had the NCAA tournament happen last year, that was a Final Four team.
Right. So pretty wild. And
National Player of the Year, Obi Toppin.
Yeah, right.
Now, did Archie recruit those guys? I can't remember if Archie recruited those guys. But I mean, even if you recruited those guys, those guys got developed by the new coach.
Right. So yeah, and I'm with you. I think Purdue's going to have a really good postseason run. I think the future is bright.
A good postseason run for the expectations for this season.
For sure.
You know, obviously, a good postseason run is winning the national championship or making the Final Four. But for this team, making the Sweet 16 would be a phenomenal.
Well, I mean, you're right, especially because
that's super ahead of schedule. With how young they are, just making the Sweet 16 would be that'd be great in my opinion.
Well, I mean, because
I know Purdue fans would be very disappointed because we would probably play the Sweet 16 and lose a heartbreaker,
right,
in that game in typical Purdue fashion. But this is very reminiscent for me of the Baby Boilers. They made it they busted through. They got to the Sweet 16, and they got hosed by UConn at the time when they had Hashim Thabit. And, it felt like, oh my gosh, we're never going to be able to get past the Sweet 16. And then they never did, but for other reasons,
right.
And because they weren't good enough. But, I feel like for them to get to the Sweet 16, that would be a huge, huge validation of this team's talent and where they are going for the future.
Well, before we wrap up tonight, we did want to take a little bit of a look here at the Indiana Pacers. And I kind of want to look back because we're now about a month or so removed from the Victor Oladipo trade. Now, granted, can't be super harsh about it because, I mean, Victor Oladipo, probably the right move for the long term, in the long run as far as getting rid of him. And then, of course, Karis LeVert ends up having, having cancer, so we have to, so obviously, his health is first, and hopefully he has, a speedy recovery and gets better. So
was it ever determined that it was cancer? I just know it was a mass.
Oh, it was a mass. I thought it was. Maybe I'm wrong there, but yeah, a mass on his kidney. And so obviously he's been out due to that. So you can't really say, oh, it's a lost trade because we haven't really even seen Karis LeVert at all. But the Pacers were 7-4 when the trade happened. They're 14-3 now. Oladipo was averaging 20 points per game, and TJ Warren, who's only played 4 games, averaged about 16 points per game. So it's been a rough go of it for the Indiana Pacers. As we're recording the podcast, they're tied with the Bulls, so they could go back down to 500 tonight. It's been a rough go of it for the Pacers. But like I said, I can't really say whether or not the trade's good or bad because we haven't seen our side of it yet. But it has been a rough go of it so far for the Pacers as we get closer to the end of the first half.
Yeah, I mean, this team I think they're playing as well as they can right now, considering, they got Jeremy Lamb back, but, he's still trying to recover from a knee injury. You don't have TJ Warren. My biggest fear about the Pacers right now is because of these injuries and trying to weather the storm, essentially, is that they are going to wear players down, players like Malcolm Brogdon. I'm not as concerned about him, but I am more concerned about the wear and tear from the minutes being put on Domantas Sabonis. That concerns me for the future for the rest of the season. I still think this Pacers team, I don't know, it all depends on health. Like they said, Karis LeVert is actually pretty close. He's to getting cleared for contact. Right now he's essentially recovering from surgery of getting the mass removed from his kidney. I think they removed the kidney, to be honest. But he's recovering from surgery, and I've never heard if it was cancerous or not. But as far as I know, it was just he's recovering from that surgery.
Right.
And should be needs to start resuming doing shoot-arounds, participating in some need TJ Warren. He's still pretty far off on that. Rumble of a Miles Turner trade coming soon, whether that be potentially to Boston. Boston's now saying, "Ooh, we kind of wish we would have traded for Miles Turner with how good he's playing," and that's exactly what we need to be successful right now. The other one that's being floated around is Turner and Jeremy Lamb, and I think Doug McDermott to the Golden State Warriors for Klay Thompson. A move like that would essentially be saying the Pacers are shutting it down for the year, with Thompson recovering from an injury as well.
Right.
And we're going to trade 3 healthy players for one. Oh, and I think they also there was another player thrown in there to come back to the Pacers.
Steph Curry.
No, it was.
I know.
I want to say Kelly Oubre, but it wasn't Kelly Oubre. It was
Steph Curry. We're getting Steph Curry and Klay Thompson for.
No, it was a lower level player, a depth piece
right.
to make the salary work. But so there are rumblings out there that the Pacers could be making moves again, which I don't at the way things are going right now, I'm 50-50 on. If Miles Turner can keep up his defensive play, because what he can do defensively covers up the defensive weaknesses of Sabonis.
Right.
But what Sabonis can do offensively kind of covers up the weaknesses offensively of Miles Turner.
Right.
So
now you talked about the Pacers possibly, if they do make, obviously if they make that trade, they would be officially shutting it down. But I
don't know if I that would just kind of have that feel.
Well, right. But the wild thing about that is, as we kind of look for what we can expect the rest of the first half is they're right now sitting at 4th in the East still. And they're technically just, 4 games back of the 1 seed. Now we don't expect them to be a 1 seed, but not by any means. But the fact of the matter is they're still, they've been able to kind of, maintain course. It's kind of like how we looked at, the end of, I can't remember if we just, kind of made this point before the bubble or once the bubble started or whatever, as far as hey, if the Pacers can just kind of, I think it was when we were expecting Oladipo to get back, it's if the Pacers, kind of ride the ship and just stay, still, remain around that 500 point. I think they'll be fine come the second half of the season once they get everybody back fully healthy. At the bare minimum, TJ Warren, and Jeremy Lamb back at full force, hopefully. Right now, there is no timetable for Warren's return, but you'd like to think it might be after the All-Star break at least. I don't know. But you're hoping at least. But right now, the Pacers are 4th in the Eastern Conference, and everybody else, they're also a bad week from being completely out. The Raptors right now are 8th, and they're 12-15, 6 games out. So, you're a bad week from being potentially out of the playoff mix, but I guess the point here is they're still obviously in it. The Oladipo trade didn't cripple them so badly that they're now, barely in or out of the playoff picture, and it's still early as well. But I think if they can just kind of maintain course and be in a good position once they get some of those players back, I think they'll be in good shape for the second half to still, maintain that kind of, middle of the pack in the Eastern Conference playoff energy that we kind of projected them to be at.
Yeah, I agree. I think this team is still a playoff team, unless, they start make big trades or anything
right.
that are geared more towards the future. They're not winning a championship this year. I'll just say that. I didn't expect them to, but overall, it is nice to see that the Pacers haven't gone out and had to buy their own big 3. They're building it, and I think they're going through some growing pains right now with a new coach. They got off to such a hot start. We're all like, oh my gosh, this team is legit. But now they've come back down to earth, and, they got some things they have to battle through. And, this is a first-year head coach. He's got to battle through those things as well and figure out how best to battle through those. And, there's going to be growing pains on both sides, and that's not totally unexpected. So I kind of feel like anything that they can do successfully this year is a positive, is a plus. It's next year and the following year where you're going to see the payoff for the struggles they may go through this year.
Yeah,
very, very typical of what we've also seen from Purdue.
Right.
What I just said. The future is bright. Anything now is just gravy.
I agree. Well, that
means I'm hungry.
I'm with you there. Well, that will do it here for the Crash Course podcast. Thank you guys all for hanging out. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Crash Course Podcast. Go to our YouTube channel, subscribe over there. We're at 23 subscribers now, so hey, be number 25, be number 50. Blow that page up. We're really excited to get that going, especially
if we get 25 subscribers. Actually, if we get 30 subscribers, I will send a personalized video message with whatever they want me to say, sing, anything like that to the 30th subscriber.
I'm here for it. You basically get your B Scott cameo if you're the 30th subscriber over there. We do have a new episode of the MCT podcast coming out this weekend as well, so make sure you're on the lookout for that. That's on the YouTube channel. You can follow us on Twitter at Crash Course FM, and remember that you can listen on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course podcast. And also remember, we record every Monday, twitch.tv/3C Media. So make sure you hit us up over there. And B. Scott, where can they find you?
Find me on Twitter at Brandon_Scott87.
Well, thank you guys all for watching tonight. It was a lot of fun. Thank you guys all for listening as well on the audio side of things. We'll be back next week with another podcast. But until then, have a good one, everybody.